At a seemingly informal and relaxed royal dinner, two unlikely names suddenly found themselves at the center of a sensational story, according to an inside source at Windsor: Peter Phillips, eldest son of Princess Anne, and Tom Parker, son of Queen Camilla. It was meant to be a night of celebration, a glittering culinary festival reviving one of Britain's oldest royal traditions. On the 14th of April 2024, the marble halls of Windsor Castle glowed with candlelight, echoing with polite laughter and the clinking of silver cutlery. The event, known formally as the Royal Gastronomy Heritage Banquet, dated back to Queen Victoria's 1840 Feast of Nations, a showcase of British cuisine and culture. This year, it was Peter Phillips, the eldest grandchild of Queen Elizabeth II and the son of Princess Anne, who had been tasked with organizing it. The gathering drew top chefs, diplomats, and senior royals, including Queen Camilla, whose son Tom Parker Bowles, a well-known food critic and author, had been invited as guest presenter. To the world, it was a harmless gesture of reconciliation, a chance for the monarchy to appear united after months of speculation about divisions within the royal household. But behind the golden drapes and ceremonial splendor, something darker was brewing. As the music of a string quartet floated through St. George's Hall, Peter moved among the guests with his usual calm precision, his reputation for efficiency well earned. He was not a man who sought attention, yet his presence commanded quiet respect. To many, he embodied what the monarchy needed most: integrity, without ambition, humility, without weakness. But at Windsor that evening, his instincts began to stir. Years of royal life had taught him that beneath the veneer of civility, words were weapons, and alliances could shift like the English weather. His intuition proved right. Toward the end of the banquet, while reviewing final preparations for the dessert course, a traditional Sussex cream pudding designed in tribute to Queen Elizabeth, Peter took a moment to step into a side corridor for a breath of air. What he heard next would unravel one of the most dangerous conspiracies in modern royal history. From the shadows of the adjoining gallery, he caught the faint murmur of voices, one unmistakably belonging to Camilla, the other to her son, Tom Parker Bowles. Their conversation was low, deliberate, but laced with the unmistakable rhythm of conspiracy. "We cannot let the bloodline dictate everything," Camilla whispered. "William will ascend, yes, but our future must be secured. And before he does," Tom replied, "I'll have the support of those who matter. The council will need a stabilizing figure, someone the public already trusts." Peter froze. Every syllable hit him like a blade. The idea that Tom, an unelected non-royal figure, might seek to influence the line of succession bordered on treason. And worse, Camilla's tone carried the calculated authority of someone not merely speculating, but commanding. He peered through the crack between the heavy velvet curtains. Camilla stood in a half-lit alcove, elegant as ever, a string of pearls glinting beneath the chandelier. Tom leaned toward her, holding a folder embossed with the royal seal, a mark reserved for confidential documents. The sight sent a chill through Peter's spine. "William's reputation is his crown," Tom said quietly. "If we can chip away at it even subtly, his legitimacy weakens. When the time comes, the council will turn to me as the neutral voice of continuity." Camilla nodded, her expression unreadable. "Then ensure the files are ready before the next review." Peter's pulse quickened. He slipped his phone from his pocket, his hand steady despite the rush of adrenaline, and pressed record. In that instant, he crossed from witness to guardian, the first member of the royal family since his grandmother's reign to stand between the crown and internal betrayal. Minutes later, as the mother and son parted ways, Peter stepped forward and snapped several photos, Tom's hand clutching the folder, the seal visible beneath his thumb. His eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of the document title through the reflection of a nearby glass cabinet. Confidential, Psychological and Public Risk Assessment, Prince William. The weight of what he held in his phone sank in. This wasn't idle gossip. It was evidence of espionage, an organized attempt to undermine the heir apparent. That night, while guests toasted to the enduring unity of the crown, Peter quietly excused himself. Driving through the fog-shrouded Berkshire roads, he replayed the recording again and again, each repetition confirming what he could barely believe. The voice of Queen Camilla, the reigning consort of King Charles III and her son, conspiring to manipulate royal succession. Peter arrived at Gatcombe Park, his mother's Gloucestershire estate, shortly before midnight. Princess Anne, known for her sharp intuition and iron will, was waiting by the fire, having sensed her son's unease since morning. Without a word, Peter placed his phone on the table and pressed play. When the recording ended, Anne said nothing for several seconds. Her expression did not flicker, but her hands, clasped before her, tightened. "We act quietly," she finally said. "This will not leave the family until we have proof beyond denial." And so began the Windsor Files Investigation. A silent, methodical inquiry led not by Scotland Yard, but by a royal bloodline's most trusted descendant. Over the coming weeks, Peter Phillips would expose one of the most calculated betrayals the House of Windsor had ever faced, one that reached straight into the heart of the monarchy's moral core. For now, the world remained blissfully unaware, but deep inside Windsor Castle, under the flickering light of its chandeliers, the first tremor of scandal had already cracked the marble. In the days that followed the Windsor banquet, Peter Phillips moved through royal life as if nothing had changed. His schedule remained perfectly routine: charity meetings in Gloucestershire, public appearances in Birmingham, and a discreet luncheon at Clarence House with his uncle, King Charles. Yet beneath the calm exterior, his mind operated with surgical precision. Every gesture, every polite smile concealed a purpose. He was no longer just a royal relative. He was the monarchy's invisible shield. The evidence he had captured on his phone was undeniable: voices, documents, and the faint but damning implication of a plot against Prince William. Still, Peter knew that in the royal world, truth alone was not enough. Evidence had to be irrefutable, and leaks could destroy reputations overnight. Only one person could be trusted: Princess Anne. At Gatcombe Park, mother and son spent long evenings in Anne's study, surrounded by stacks of neatly labelled folders dating back to the Queen's reign. The room, once used for equestrian records, had become their command centre. Anne, her hair tied back, scanned every transcript and image Peter provided. "This is bigger than gossip," she murmured. "They're building a framework, a way to make Tom appear indispensable to the next reign." By the following week, Anne had made contact with a retired intelligence operative she had once known through her charity work, Major Hale, a former MI5 field officer now running a private security firm. Under Anne's direct supervision, Hale assembled a discreet 3-person surveillance team. Their mission? Track Tom Parker Bowles and his known associates for as long as necessary. Peter signed the operation under a simple alias: Project Marble. For 6 nights, Hale's team tailed Tom across London. They logged every movement from his Chelsea townhouse to late-night visits to obscure cafes near Kensington. It was on the 22nd of April 2024, at precisely 8:46 p.m, that they struck gold. Tom was seen entering a dimly lit bar off Old Brompton Road, where he met a tall, thin man with sunken cheeks and a nervous twitch, Sir Alistair Greaves. Greaves had once been one of the palace's most senior advisors, dismissed in 2023 after an inquiry linked him to leaked financial documents concerning royal estates. His reappearance in Tom's orbit set off alarms. Hale's camera captured a single image: Greaves passing Tom a folder stamped with the Buckingham Palace security seal, a seal reserved for only the highest-level internal documents. Peter received the footage just after midnight. His jaw tightened as he studied each frame. The details were chilling: the seal, the signatures, and the reckless confidence on Tom's face. "They've got internal access," Peter told Anne grimly. "Greaves still has connections inside the palace." Anne's response was immediate. "Then we must move faster. Once they sense they're being watched, they'll bury everything." By the end of the week, Hale's second report painted an even darker picture. Transactions from one of Camilla's charitable foundations, the Green Crown Initiative, showed a string of transfers, each under £50,000, funneled into a newly registered shell company called Veritas Consulting Limited. The director listed? Sir Alistair Greaves. Peter's instincts, honed by years of quiet observation under his grandmother's tutelage, told him exactly what he was seeing: a financial laundering network disguised as philanthropy, funding an information operation meant to destabilize William's image. To verify his theory, Peter met Hale in person at a quiet tea room in Mayfair. The former agent slid an encrypted USB drive across the table. "Everything's there," Hale said. "Emails, transfer log, voice notes. But there's something else, a meeting request. Tomorrow night, Waterloo Station, Tom and Greaves, 11 p.m. That night, Peter barely slept. At 10:45 the next evening, Hale and his partner were in place beneath Waterloo's underground car park. Through the haze of fluorescent lights, Tom appeared, clutching another folder. He handed it to Greaves, who flipped through the pages with a grim smile. Hale's recording device captured every word. "Once William's vulnerabilities are public," Greaves said, "you'll be untouchable. The Queen will have no choice but to formalize your role." "And if Peter gets in the way?" Tom asked. "Then we'll make sure he looks compromised first." Moments later, the men parted ways. By dawn, Peter had the full recording in his inbox. He sat motionless at his desk, staring at the waveform on his laptop. The implications were catastrophic, not only a smear campaign against the future king, but an explicit plan to frame him. His phone buzzed Hale again. "Be careful," the message read. "They know we're watching." At 7:15 a.m., Hale's car was rammed by a white van on Ebury Street. Two masked men smashed his windshield before fleeing. Hale survived, his shoulder fractured, but his message was clear. The hunters had become the hunted. Anne's face hardened when she heard. "They're desperate," she said. "And desperation makes them sloppy." Peter exhaled slowly. "Then it's time we turn their own game against them." By the end of April, Project Marble had entered its second phase. Peter and Anne compiled every file, every image, and every transaction into a private dossier, the Windsor Integrity Archive. The evidence was overwhelming, but they needed a single defining strike, one that would expose the scheme before the Privy Council itself. In the shadows of Windsor Castle, history was quietly preparing for another reckoning, one not fought with armies, but with truth. And Peter Phillips, the quiet grandson of the late Queen, was about to become the most dangerous man in the monarchy. By May 2024, the quiet investigation had grown into a full-fledged shadow war within the royal household. For weeks, Peter Phillips and Princess Anne had worked tirelessly to compile what they now called the Windsor Integrity Archive, a dossier thick with recordings, bank transfers, and photographic evidence linking Tom Parker Bowles and Sir Alistair Greaves to the covert operation aimed at destabilizing Prince William. But in the gilded world of monarchy, truth rarely travelled faster than rumour. Before Peter could present his findings, Camilla and Tom struck first. On the morning of May 8, headlines exploded across British tabloids. Peter Phillips under investigation for charity fund misuse. Queen's grandson faces allegations of financial misconduct. The timing was surgical. The story cited unnamed palace sources and claimed that Peter had diverted funds from a joint royal foundation to cover private business ventures. It was a masterstroke, elegant, devastating, and nearly believable. Within hours, social media ignited. Commentators debated whether the once modest grandson of the late Queen had finally succumbed to the same greed that had tarnished others before him. Anne's phone didn't stop ringing. Advisors, journalists, even old allies called for clarification, but she said nothing. To her, denial was a trap. "We respond only with proof," she told Peter, voice steely. Let them choke on their own lies. Peter, though shaken, understood. They're trying to isolate us, he said, pacing the room. If the public doubts me, the evidence I hold loses its power. The smear campaign was textbook Greaves, a blend of misinformation and selective truth. A single minor transaction had been exaggerated into a scandal. What the world didn't know was that the so-called diverted funds had been authorized by the late Queen Elizabeth II herself as part of a youth equestrian grant. Greaves had twisted a legitimate ledger entry into a weapon. Meanwhile, Tom moved brazenly through the social circuit, smiling for cameras, hosting interviews about modernizing royal accountability. He played the part of a reformer, polished, articulate, and publicly sympathetic. Behind closed doors, however, he doubled down. One insider at Clarence House later confirmed that Tom bragged of having cornered the Queen's grandson and that his downfall was days away. But Peter was already planning his counterstrike. On May 10, at Anne's request, Peter met Lord Harrington, a senior Privy Council member and lifelong ally of the late Queen. In a discreet meeting at James's Palace, Peter handed over the encrypted drive. "You'll want to hear this," he said. Within the next 30 minutes, Harrington listened in silence, Camilla's whisper, Tom's confession, Greaves's plotting voice. When it ended, he looked up, pale. "Good God, Peter," he whispered. "This is sedition. I'm all..." The following day, the Privy Council scheduled an emergency closed session. Its stated purpose: to address allegations pertaining to royal integrity and security. Only a handful of people knew what was truly about to unfold. But Camilla's camp wasn't idle. A second wave of media attacks hit that weekend this time, suggesting that Anne herself had interfered in royal governance by using private investigators. The stories were vicious, filled with anonymous quotes from royal insiders. Yet something had shifted. The leaks were too aggressive, too obvious. Even the most cynical journalists began to question their source. Behind the palace walls, the tension was suffocating. King Charles, torn between loyalty to his wife and faith in his sister, retreated into silence. William, informed discreetly by Anne, cancelled public engagements under the pretense of a family matter. The monarchy had entered a cold civil war. Late that night, Peter stood by the windows of Gatcombe Park, staring out over the darkened fields. The reflection staring back at him was not that of a quiet royal organizer anymore, but of a man standing at the threshold of history. He turned to his mother. "Tomorrow they'll hear everything." Anne met his gaze, her voice calm and certain. "Then speak for the truth, not vengeance. The monarchy survives only when someone is brave enough to protect it even from itself." At 10 a.m., on May 12, Windsor Castle would no longer be a place of ceremony. It would become a courtroom of conscience where loyalty, deception, and bloodline would collide under the watchful eyes of the crown. And when the council doors closed, Peter Phillips would walk in alone, armed with a single phone, a drive of evidence, and the quiet conviction that truth still had power left. Morning broke cold and pale over Windsor Castle on the 12th of May 2024. From the outside, the fortress seemed as timeless and tranquil as ever. But within its stone walls, tension churned like an unseen storm. A rare emergency session of the Privy Council had been convened in St. George's Chamber under the direct authority of King Charles III. The stated agenda, matters concerning the preservation of royal integrity, gave nothing away. Yet everyone summoned understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. For the first time since the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, a member of the royal family would publicly challenge another within the council's sacred circle. At precisely 10 a.m., the chamber doors shut with a resonant thud. Sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows, illuminating the long oak table polished to a mirror sheen. At one end sat King Charles, his face drawn, eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. To his right, Queen Camilla, calm but visibly taut beneath her ivory coat. Opposite her, Flanked by Lord Harrington and Princess Anne, stood Peter Phillips, the quiet royal now thrust into the centre of an invisible war. No reporters were allowed, no aides permitted. Only the royal principals and 12 councillors, the same number that had once advised Queen Victoria on matters of crisis. The air was heavy with anticipation. Charles began first, his voice low but steady. This assembly is called to address certain disturbing allegations. I would ask that we proceed with dignity. Mr. Phillips, you may begin. Peter stepped forward. For a brief moment, he felt the enormity of the moment pressing upon him, centuries of history, the weight of the crown, and his grandmother's moral legacy echoing in his mind. Then, without ceremony, he placed his phone on the table and pressed play. The recording filled the chamber. Camilla's voice. We cannot let the bloodline dictate everything. William will ascend, yes, but our future must be secured. Tom Parker Bowles. Before he does, I'll have the council's trust. They'll see me as the stabilizing heir. The words hung in the air like smoke. Even the ticking of the antique clock seemed to stop. Charles's expression hardened, Camilla's fingers tightened around her pen. Tom, seated beside her as her invited proxy, went pale. Peter spoke quietly but firmly. That was recorded on the evening of April 14, during the Royal Gastronomy Heritage Banquet at Windsor. The folder in Tom's possession bore the royal security seal, the same seal later confirmed to be removed from internal archives by Sir Alistair Greaves. Murmurs rippled through the room. Lord Harrington stood, handing out copies of the encrypted transcript and financial documents Peter had gathered. He summarized the findings with military precision: unauthorized access to classified royal assessments, financial transfers from the Green Crown Initiative charity to shell companies, and communications linking Greaves to an influence campaign targeting Prince William. Charles raised his head slowly. And you're certain of the authenticity? Beyond doubt, Peter said. The documents were verified by independent auditors. Hale's surveillance confirms the meetings, the exchanges, the payment trails, all leading back to Camilla's private network. The Queen Consort's eyes flared. How dare you, she snapped, her composure cracking. You think I would endanger the monarchy for my own son? This is slander, pure fabrication. But Anne's voice cut through the uproar, sharp as a blade. Fabrication, is it? Then perhaps you can explain these. From her leather folder, she withdrew 2 signed authorizations, bearing Camilla's distinct looping signature, transferring £180,000 from her charity to Veritas Consulting Limited. The documents had been authenticated that morning by the Treasury Liaison Office. Camilla stirred, stunned. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in her public life, the Queen Consort looked cornered. Then came the final blow. Peter gestured toward Lord Harrington, who dimmed the lights and played the Waterloo Station recording. Greaves's voice, scratchy but distinct, filled the hall. Once William's reputation is fractured, Tom becomes the honorary successor, a stabilizing figure for the people. And if Peter resists? Tom asked. Then we ruin him first. The words were unmistakable. Even Camilla's poise faltered. The king lowered his gaze, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the table edge. Lord Harrington stood. Your Majesty, this is not merely impropriety. This is conspiracy within the royal household, an attempt to influence succession and subvert the crown's constitutional integrity. Tom shot up from his chair, voice shaking. It's all been twisted. I wanted to help. Help yourself, Anne interrupted coldly. You wanted the crown without blood, without burden, just power. Camilla turned toward Charles, eyes wet with rage. You cannot let this stand. He's your nephew. Charles didn't reply. He rose slowly, his expression grave. He's also my mother's grandson, he said at last, and she taught us that duty comes before comfort, and always before deceit. At that moment, the great doors opened again. Sir Alistair Greaves entered, escorted by 2 guards from the Royal Protection Service. His face was ashen, His eyes avoided Camilla's. A brief exchange followed, barely audible, a signed confession implicating both Tom and Camilla in the misuse of charitable funds and manipulation of official documents. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Charles turned toward the council. "The monarchy has endured wars, abdications, and scandals," he said softly, "but it cannot endure dishonor. We will act swiftly and quietly." Camilla closed her eyes, her breath trembling. Tom stared at the floor, broken. By the time the meeting adjourned at noon, history had shifted course. Orders were signed under the Royal Custodian Decree, an ancient protocol reserved for cases threatening the Crown's legitimacy. Tom Parker Bowles was stripped of royal privilege and barred from all state functions, pending expulsion from the United Kingdom. Sir Alistair Greaves was formally disavowed and stripped of his knighthood. As for Camilla, no prison awaited her, but a different sentence was delivered. Removal from all ceremonial duties, effective immediately. She would retreat to Ray Mill House, her private estate in Wiltshire, under indefinite seclusion. When Peter left the chamber, the corridors of Windsor seemed colder, quieter. Anne joined him in silence, and for a long time, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "You've done what few dared. You've restored what they tried to corrupt." Oh. Peter looked ahead toward the sunlight cutting through the stone arches. "I only did what was necessary," he murmured. "For William. For her legacy." Behind them, the echo of the council doors closing marked more than the end of a meeting. It marked the fall of a queen's ambition and the rise of the Crown's conscience. The aftermath of the Privy Council meeting sent quiet tremors through the corridors of royal power. No official announcement was issued. Buckingham Palace released only a brief statement that read, "Her Majesty Queen Camilla will be taking an extended period of private reflection. His Majesty the King has expressed full confidence in the continued stability and unity of the Crown." But inside Britain's aristocratic and political circles, whispers spread like wildfire. The public didn't yet know the full truth, but everyone sensed a seismic shift. Camilla's sudden withdrawal from royal duties, coupled with Tom Parker Bowles's disappearance from public life, left an unmistakable void. 2 days later, the 14th of May 2024, discreet convoys left Clarence House under cover of dawn. Camilla's personal effects were packed in silence, family portraits, private letters, and a few books she had kept since her early marriage. She was escorted not to Windsor nor Balmoral, but to Ray Mill House, her private residence in Wiltshire, the same estate she had owned before marrying Charles. Guards were posted discreetly along the perimeter, and communication with the outside world was strictly monitored. To the public, the palace described it as a voluntary retreat. In truth, it was a gilded exile. Tom Parker Bowles, meanwhile, faced a harsher fate. Under the Royal Custodian Decree, he was stripped of his honorary roles, removed from the line of ceremonial invitations, and formally expelled from the United Kingdom for acts detrimental to the dignity and security of the Crown. His assets in Britain were frozen pending review. Within a week, he quietly departed for Australia, where distant relatives of the Parker Bowles family owned property. His name vanished from the official royal registry, his social invitations rescinded, his reputation erased as though he had never existed. The royal household staff, long accustomed to the unspoken etiquette of discretion, operated under strict orders. Files were archived, digital access revoked, and every trace of Tom's correspondence expunged. The monarchy had entered damage control mode, methodical, silent, absolute. Yet behind this calculated restoration of order, King Charles bore the heaviest weight. Those close to him noticed the change immediately. He cancelled 3 scheduled audiences and retreated to Birkhall, his Scottish estate. There, away from prying eyes, he wrestled with a private agony, the realization that the very person he had fought to legitimize as Queen Consort had nearly compromised the monarchy itself. A single line from his mother's diary haunted him. one that he had read shortly after her passing in 2022. A crown is not protected by love, but by truth, even when truth wounds the heart. For the first time, Charles understood the cost of that wisdom. Meanwhile, Princess Anne and Peter Phillips continued their work quietly. Neither sought credit. They made no public statements, attended no interviews. In private correspondence to a senior aide, Anne wrote, "Justice must not humiliate, but it must protect. The institution survives not through pride, but through discipline." In June, an internal audit confirmed what Peter's evidence had already proven. £1.3 million had been misappropriated through Camilla's charity network. The funds were discreetly returned, and the organisations were restructured under new oversight, led by the Duchess of Edinburgh. Publicly, the Crown framed the developments as part of a routine modernisation. But insiders knew that it was Anne's hand that had restored accountability, and Peter's courage that had made it possible. Weeks later, Peter received a handwritten note, delivered by the King's private secretary. There was no official seal, no signature, only a single line in Charles's elegant script. "You have done what duty demanded. The house stands because of men who speak the truth." Peter read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it inside a locked drawer at Gatcombe Park. He told no one. In the public eye, he remained the quiet, affable cousin, a man without title, living far from palace intrigues. Yet behind closed doors, senior aides began referring to him with quiet respect as the Guardian of Windsor. As summer light returned to the castle gardens, the monarchy appeared stable again, but within the stone of Windsor, the echoes of that secret reckoning lingered, a warning that even within the mightiest institutions, corruption begins not with ambition, but with silence. And for Peter Phillips, silence had become both his weapon and his vow. He had proven that even without a crown, one man's integrity could safeguard an empire built on centuries of fragile faith. By the autumn of 2024, Windsor Castle had regained its outward calm. Tourists once again filled the Long Walk, the flags fluttered atop the Round Tower, and the palace press office resumed its careful rhythm of state announcements. Yet for those within the walls, the silence felt different, heavier, wiser, and edged with memory. The scandal that had nearly torn the monarchy apart was buried under layers of official discretion. Camilla remained secluded at Raymill House, seen only by a handful of attendants. Her health, insiders whispered, had declined. Tom Parker Bowles, living in quiet obscurity abroad, ceased communication with London entirely. What had begun as an act of ambition ended in exile not just from Britain, but from history. King Charles returned gradually to public life, his demeanour more solemn, his words measured with a new humility. At the Remembrance Day ceremony that November, standing beside Prince William, he delivered a short, unscripted line that resonated across the nation. "The crown's strength lies not in who wears it, but in those who defend its honour when no one is watching." Few outside the family understood the full meaning, but Peter Phillips did. That evening, Charles invited him to a private audience at Buckingham Palace. The meeting was brief. No titles were mentioned, no speeches made. The king simply extended his hand and said quietly, "You've done what even I could not. You've held the family to its word." Peter bowed, the moment heavy with unspoken reconciliation. In the weeks that followed, Peter returned to Gatcombe Park, resuming his quiet life away from ceremony. He continued his work with youth charities and agricultural councils, always deflecting praise, always keeping distance from gossip. When a journalist later asked why he had never pursued a title, he replied with a small smile, "Some inherit crowns, others inherit duty." Princess Anne, ever composed, watched her son with quiet pride. In him, she saw the reflection of her mother's discipline, the same iron resolve that had carried Elizabeth II through wars, crises, and personal trials. Peter had not sought power, yet he had become its moral custodian. As winter descended, a soft mist settled over Windsor once more. Inside St. George's Chapel, A private mass was held for the late Queen's memory. Few attended, just Charles, Anne, William, Catherine, and Peter. As the organ swelled, Peter's gaze lifted to the carved motto above the altar, Honi soit qui mal y pense. Shame on him who thinks evil of it. The words, etched centuries before, seemed to echo the lesson he had lived, that the monarchy endures not through privilege, but through conscience. When the service ended, Peter lingered a moment longer, his hand resting on the pew where his grandmother once prayed. The light through the stained glass bathed the stone floor in soft gold. In that quiet glow, he understood what she had always meant when she spoke of duty beyond glory. As he stepped outside, the bells of Windsor tolled in the distance, steady and clear, not in mourning, but in renewal. The scandal had faded, the truth had prevailed, and the crown, bruised but unbroken, stood once more in the light. For history would remember not the whisper of conspiracy, but the silence of a man who had the courage to listen and the strength to act. Power may fade, but honor endures, and as long as it does, the House of Windsor shall stand.